It's been a while since I've taken you behind the scenes at the Scottish Parliament to see what goes on in those committee rooms. Here's another look.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. I wanted to ask a question following up from a point from Amy Johnson, but any of you can respond. I'd like to ask if you were talking about different intersecting power inequalities, and I wanted to ask if you're aware of evidence that highlights the prevalence of sexual harassment among different minority groups. So in terms of where homophobia, racism, transphobia and so on plays a role in sexual harassment.
So what have we got here? We've got a committee organised by the Scottish Parliament in conjunction with an organisation called Young Women Lead. So this committee meeting is only for young women. I think the idea is that young women need special encouragement to get involved in the Parliament and involved in politics, because the problem is a lack of female role models in leadership in the Scottish Parliament. So they're trying to address that issue. Now, I assume there's a Young Men Lead organisation as well. I assume the young men have a special committee meeting coming up anytime soon. I couldn't actually see any details of that, but no doubt it's coming. Okay, on we go.
And welcome to this first meeting of the committee. It's a very unique committee, and the Parliament is supporting it in partnership with Young Women Lead. That's a leadership project that 38 young women from across Scotland are taking part in.
Just as an aside, notice the rainbow lanyard on the member of the Parliament staff there, making it clear that the whole parliamentary structure supports the LGBT agenda. That's a political agenda, so they're just putting on display the fact that the Parliament is a biased institution. So what topic will these young women be discussing? Will it be the economy, standard of education? No, of course not. It's going to be some social justice warrior theme, identity politics. So, group of women, what's it going to be? Well, they've chosen sexual harassment. Now, if identity politics was a really big thing for you, then obviously you'd think having a young women's committee meeting is a great idea. Who would you choose to be in charge as the deputy convener? Let's see.
And I'll begin with a question from our Deputy Convener, Nazia Mahmood.
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to open up the discussion by asking our witnesses whether they think the term sexual harassment and any associated terms, for example, sexist behaviour, if this is widely understood, and if not, what might be missing from that common understanding of this issue?
Who would like to respond first? Oh, you got them right in the first question there.
So girls, we understand all about sexual harassment, but the unenlightened masses out there don't understand it anywhere near as well as we do. What can we do about it? So the topic there, sexual harassment, particularly in schools. And let's get one thing straight before I carry on. I'm sure there are plenty of boys in schools in Scotland who really don't know how to behave towards girls. They've got no understanding of the proper boundaries of expressing sexuality. They lack self-restraint. Their sexuality might have been warped to some degree by pornography. This is not helped by the schools preaching a sort of only if you both feel like it and use a condom sort of line. So I'm sure there's plenty of boys in Scottish schools who can be pretty obnoxious to each other, to teachers, and also to girls. And that would take different forms with the girls than it would to the other people. So there's a genuine problem there that needs addressing, and some boys need teaching this important lesson. So let's hear from our first witness to the committee. This is a taxpayer-funded feminist.
But I think something that's also not understood very well is how it interacts and often interacts with racism, homophobia, transphobia and ableism. And there's very little information on that. We're not good at gathering that, and that's something that I think that needs to be taken more seriously as well.
So we've got all of the social justice chat there. Intersectionality. That's the idea that special treatment's needed for women, black and minority ethnic, LGBT, disabled people. But if you've got two of those things, then you even need more special treatment. If you've got three, well, you really do need the red carpet laying out for you. So there's more research is needed. Who will be paying for that, I wonder? Who will be kept in a job doing that research? So here we've got these young women being taught a political ideology by taxpayer-funded feminists in the taxpayer-funded Parliament. Right, next up is the representative from the Guides. Now, when I was young, my sister was in the Guides, and she used to make this thing where you got some dough and twisted it around the end of a stick and cooked it in a fire. It was absolutely delicious. So I'd like to ask the Guides, do they still do that? It was really good.
In our research and girls' attitude survey, we broke down sexual harassment into different categories to get a real insight into what girls mean when they talk about it. So, for example, we found that in 2017, 41% of girls aged 13 to 21 had experienced jokes or taunts. A similar number had experienced sexist comments on social media, and then about a fifth had experienced things like unwanted touching or groping. So I think it's really helpful to break it down into really practical terms so girls can relate to that. A lot of the anecdotal evidence we gathered during our campaign was that often when girls spoke to their peers about sexual harassment, even among girls, it was just dismissed as a bit of banter. Again, when they spoke to boys of a similar age, it was dismissed as a bit of banter, or boys will be boys. And probably the most worrying thing was when they spoke to teachers about what they'd experienced. Sometimes they would get the same response, oh, that's just how boys behave.
Well, that's interesting. So the definition of sexual harassment encompasses jokes or taunts and sexist comments. Now, what amounts to a sexist comment? Some people would regard a lot of what I would think as common sense as sexist comments. So when we hear statistics about sexual harassment, we need to take that with a pinch of salt if it includes things like that. Now, some people try and dismiss this as banter. Well, on some occasions, it might be. Is there a danger that we're encouraging these girls to take offence, to report things, even though there wasn't actually malice involved, even though it could have just been a bit of fun? Is this a hate crime mentality where people are encouraged to report for political ends often? Now here the teachers seem to be clueless. That's a bit of a theme through the discussion because they don't take things seriously. Well, is that really true? I think probably more often than not the teachers take a balanced view, and when it's the best thing to say, they do say, oh come on, just take it in your stride, it's not a big deal. And when they say that, I would think it probably wasn't. Okay, on to the next taxpayer-funded feminist.
And I think there's perhaps a point to be made about the, I think there's sort of the policy framework and the guidance that's out there for education. And I think that there is a kind of a preference to sort of neutralise issues of equality into respect and fairness and kind of individual level good behaviour. And I think it would help if the guidance that was there for all the kind of education services, teacher training, to be clear on the need to actually educate on inequality, these different forms of intersecting inequalities and how they work.
Well, I think she's got that completely wrong there. It is about personal behaviour. To treat people right, you don't need to swallow the whole inequalities package. You can teach boys to treat girls well without them swallowing the whole gender pay gap myth, etc., etc. So she's saying there's a problem here, and the only solution to it is to preach my ideology at school kids. Now, it's perfectly possible to disagree with the central principles of contemporary Western feminism and still treat women perfectly decently. To give an example of someone who does that, me.
Well, so the idea of sexual harassment being rooted in gender inequality starts much, much earlier. It starts from the age of 2, according to a lot of evidence. So considering how that can be tackled and how, sort of, whether it's gender friendly or gender equal nurseries or childcare practitioners.
So clearly they want to get in early with the feminist message. Childcare and nursery, never too early to start preaching. Now that's fine if the state's providing this childcare, but what if for some incomprehensible reason there are some ignorant parents who actually want to bring up their own children? How can we make sure they're doing it right? A named person will be able to check up on them. Now, years and years ago, my wife and I applied to be foster carers in Edinburgh. We went through the training for it. One of the evenings of training focused on the gender pay gap, and I offered some alternative perspectives to those being presented by the social worker, and at the end of the process my wife was accepted and I was rejected, unfit to be a substitute parent.
I think if we tackle gender equality effectively, boys and men will lose some power in relation to girls and women, but I think they'll gain in well-being.
So boys and men need to lose power. What power do boys have exactly? What special treatment are they enjoying? They're achieving poorer results academically, masculinity in general has been maligned, and they're having to face a very feminized education system. Men's power. How about a man who's a taxi driver working all hours to provide for his young family? Does he need to give up some of his power and privilege for the sake of this theory? That's the problem with social justice. If you try and achieve justice between social groups, you actually end up producing injustice between the individuals. Start trying to even up the groups, you treat the individuals unjustly. And these impressionable young women are listening to this. They're being inducted into the gender power struggle theory. It's just indoctrination into cultural Marxism.
But I think we need to be having more conversations about the fact that the only emotion that is okay for young men to display in public is anger.
Well, that's just rubbish, isn't it? I mean, go to any football game and you'll see lots of men expressing other emotions than anger, joy, for example. Now, the agenda here is to make a virtue out of expressing emotions. Now, men in general tend to be less emotional than women. That's fine. It can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. But on some occasions, emotional restraint can be a form of strength. But here, of course, they're idealizing feminine characteristics and making masculine characteristics a weakness.
Yeah, I think a lot of the information we have is UK-wide, and even that we know will be incredibly underreported.
So how exactly do you know it's underreported? I mean, what's happened here is researchers have asked girls to give their views and they've told them about their experiences. What additional information have they got that leads them to the conclusion that there's underreporting going on?
Interpret and absorb things that are around them and learn from a very young age whether what they are is less or more, and also have to fit into a binary that requires a lot of them, is really important to tackling this as a whole.
Fit into a binary. Yep, that's exactly what children should be encouraged to do. There are two sorts of people, male and female, and the route to a happy life is to enter fully into life in accordance with one's biological sex. The facts are clear on that one. But instead, these people want wacky gender ideology teaching at an ever younger age.
For sure, and it fits into health and well-being, which is a priority for children of all ages.
Promoting transgenderism under the banner of health and well-being. Transgenderism is associated with terrible mental health problems, high suicide rates, invasive and irreversible surgery, bitter regret, etc. It's not a route to health and well-being. Encouraging gender questioning and fluidity in the name of health and well-being is about as sensible as encouraging smoking in the name of health and well-being.
Yeah, I suppose I was speaking about sexuality distinct from sexual orientation, so just about being able to become sexual beings and having freedoms in the way that they do that and what that means to them, rather than that being getting very, very strong messages about what's okay and what's not okay.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? She doesn't want strong messages about what's okay and what's not okay. That's a bit of a dilemma, isn't it? Surely the whole point of this discussion is about teaching young people about what's okay and what's not okay with regard to sexual contact and sexual relationships with the opposite sex. So is that message just for girls? Girls don't need teaching about what's okay and what's not okay, but boys do. There's a bit of moral confusion here, and that's a big part of the problem.
Do you think that it could be argued that closing the attainment gap could be done by improving this kind of education in schools and through teacher training?
Closing the attainment gap. Well, you're right on message, aren't you? You've obviously learnt the language of the Scottish Parliament. But to answer your question, no.
I was wondering what reasons any of you could give for the amount of sexual harassment and sexist behaviour that happens in schools, and is it as commonplace as the research is suggesting?
Watching that clip, the thought occurred to me, the girls might think about how they dress at school. Do they really want a blouse or a top that's open so far down? Would it not be an idea to fasten up a couple more buttons? When I see the girls coming and going from the local high school where I live, a lot of them have incredibly short skirts. I mean, really short skirts, very low cut tops, open tops. What message is that sending? I think it's sending the message that the girls got dressed in the morning with the intention of being sexually alluring. That might not actually be the case, but it's still the message it's tending to convey. Now, if you go out of your way to dress in a revealing way, knowing that this will attract the attention of the testosterone-fueled boys, you shouldn't be entirely surprised if a boy's mind is on something other than the maths homework when he talks to you at school. That sort of dress appropriate at school? No. Is anyone in this committee going to suggest that girls maintain some degree of modesty and dress at school? Of course not. That would be sacrilege, because it's all the boys' fault, aided and abetted by their incompetent teachers. Now, of course, any hardline feminist worth her salt will hear what I've just said and translate it into something like, it's all the girls' fault, boys can't help sexually harassing girls if they wear attractive clothes. Now, I really can't be bothered answering that. If people can't understand simple statements in the English language, that's really not my problem.
Because there are limited role models in areas of politics and science, business, the media, I guess what we really want to get to a point is that women succeeding at those high levels will not be an anomaly where it will become, you know, the new normal.
Well, I've got great news for you. We are already at that point. So the guys can go back to making those delicious dough twists on the end of sticks. But of course, feminists can never admit victory. Now, in that committee, we had an SNP MSP leading proceedings. There's obviously no dissent. There'll be no dissent in the whole of the Parliament to what's going on in that committee. Now, if you put Scottish Family Party MSPs in there, there would be an alternative perspective. Maybe there'd be groups of young people in the Parliament discussing how they reject identity politics. We wouldn't be changing things by our number of MSPs, but we'd be changing things by speaking out, by removing the assumption that everyone agrees with this sort of thing. We make them think twice about it. We present counter-arguments in and out of the Parliament and shift the centre of gravity of debate. For example, when Nicola Sturgeon announces that she's going to have a mentoring programme where she personally helps one young woman, would you not like to see someone stand up in the Scottish Parliament and say, isn't that sexist? Why is it just for young women? Well, the good news is we live in a democracy. You can use your vote to vote for the Scottish Family Party and bring that situation about. So I hope you enjoyed watching. Do subscribe to us on YouTube and go to our website, and you might even want to join us. Thanks for watching.